Hey everyone, it's Clint. Welcome to Sweetcast. This is an article from Fandom Wire, and the interesting part about this is when you Google comics news and you scroll down a bit, people also ask, "Is the comic book industry dying?" That's the first question. Are comic book sales declining? And the answers to these questions, it's interesting because this is how a normal person might approach comics, and when they do, is the comic book industry dying? This is the article that they get. Now, the take from this article on the state of comics is really interesting because it's not an angle that I had fully considered before. Maybe there's a little bit of overlap, but I think that I don't know. I think that there's an interesting component to this, and what it comes down to is incentive. That's going to be the word of the day: incentive. Essentially, the way this article lies out is that although comic book sales are going down, they even recognize that the kids books, Dogman and all that, that is the reason for the increase. If they go through, this is from ICV2, which is interesting because again, this article is sort of not citing culture war reasons as reasons at all. When somebody's from the outside looking at the comic book industry, they might not have any clue that there is a culture war going on within comics. They're going to be searching for answers, searching for reasons why the industry is suffering. In this case, it's been pretty interesting. All right, so a phenomenon has been recorded by comic book bloggers. They have been predicting this scenario since years. The MCU started a revolution in the industry. For the first time, the comic book publisher had a way of generating money with their copyrighted characters other than the conventional comic book streams. Movies were a great alternative. I'm going to stop right there for a minute. Not only an alternative, but if you think about it, how many scripts are written out there for movies, and you think of the pure number of movies that are actually made, not just optioned to be made, but actually made because they originated as a comic book. It's astounding when you think about it. Hollywood's a tough business, making films, especially ones that have high budgets. For comic book movies, most of these shows are they're not low budget. They're actually really high budget films because of what they're attempting to do. And to think of how many of them have started as comics, now you start to see why the incentives have moved away from making good comic books to making movie ready comic books. Those are not the same thing, this article would argue. So, following the MCU model, the end goal of most comic book publishers has been to ensure that their superheroes get a movie deal. To do that requires added focus on the storyline and character development of their flagship heroes. And then here you have Deadshot. What's his name? Shot. I don't remember his name. I've literally never read this. Valiant superhero something shot. Somebody's gonna correct me for sure. All right, so this is hurting the overall industry because it is hurting the quality of the comic books being released to the market by making the comic book issues more monotonous and generic. Now, why would movies need to be monotonous and generic? Well, because movie makers, movie studios have to cut their loss. They have to minimize their losses as much as they can. And so they want movies that they're sure, people are going to go in and have an okay time enjoying and pay the money, and they get to move on. They want something as safe as possible. In the world of comic books, you don't actually have to be safe. You're incentivized to just make an awesome comic book. So you can see where there's a little bit of a difficulty. I got thinking about this and I thought, Downcast, if I had been making Downcast to be a movie, what would be different? Well, the whole thing would be different because I would absolutely be considering what would it cost to make a movie of a city that's floating in the sky. The cost would be outrageous for that. And you could go on and on and on to other things, but the point is, when you're making something for that's intended to inspire a movie, it's going to be a different kind of motivation. It's going to incentivize you far differently. So comic book sales suffer. So then it's a spiral effect. Because comic book sales go down, you are more all in on getting a movie made. Everything comes down to the fact that you need to make the film. That's your payoff, because the comic books are not doing it for you. All right, so I'm going to continue here. To top it off, many of the superhero lines are being discontinued despite promising prospects because they do not get movie or TV deals. Perch made a video about this, and he talked about how people want series, and I totally agree with this. People want series. There's a massive number of comic book readers that, one of the things you love about comic books is because they make for such a great serialized format. When the big two are putting out new books, even though the perception is that they're continuing series with these characters, they're actually canceling books all the time. So it's hard to get really committed to a series as a reader when you know that things can change so drastically so quickly, because they are essentially just pitching movie ideas. When I think about it in this context, it's so upsetting when I see comic book pros online saying, oh, hey, we're going to justify the comic book industry by saying that this is the think tank. This is the research and development for movies. That's how we justify our existence. What? That's the exact problem. So I actually think if the Marvel movies went away, the comic book industry would have to get healthier, because it wouldn't be an option to go for the movie option route. All right, so two changes in general that are affecting the industry big time. The first is the traditional bookstore channel model is flatlining, and that's true. I mean, it's just brick and mortar with everything. Across the board, brick and mortar is suffering. So that's not a comic book specific thing. However, I do think it's compounded by the fact that people aren't interested in getting comic books now, because comic books are only interested in movies. Right, so the next, continue here. Chain and independent bookstores, Amazon, and other online retailer stores have already surpassed dedicated comic book stores in North America. Graphic novel sales, which stood at $635 million US in 2018, have also surpassed traditional print sales, which were $360 million US in 2018. The deficit has only widened in 2020, and there seems to be no way to bridge that gap. All right. Okay. The second reason is that we had mentioned earlier, the kid-friendly content is getting a major boost within the publishing domain. Most of the print industry is diverting its resources to cater to this previously untapped category. I'm going to stop you there too and ask, how many of these books are originating from Marvel and DC or Image? How many of them? Oh, none. Oh, okay. It's amazing when you think about it that Marvel has characters like Spider-Man, and yet they don't have a major kids line. They could be publishing hardcovers just like Dogman, same form factor, smaller overall, dimensions per page, art that's targeted toward younger kids, and storylines that's targeted toward younger kids. I guarantee you, I've got young kids that love those books. Dogman, they want silly, goofy, but they could do that with Spider-Man. They could, but they're not. I don't understand at all why that is. Very interesting. So David Steinberger is the CEO of Amazon's digital graphic novel services called Comixology. In an interview with the New York Comic Con conference in 2018, he said that a major reason the comic book industry is suffering a negative impact is because of the rise of on-demand streaming services. People are getting addicted to the binge consumption mentality. The printed comic books cannot hope to penetrate that market because they are periodical in nature. Each issue requires time, effort and patience to be released into the market. What I would disagree with here is that if as soon as you get into a series, if you wait for the trade, so to speak, you can binge a comic book series. You just have to wait. But what that requires is a comic book to become a comic book series. And that takes money, and it takes some number of readers to be patient and wait for each installment of that series. So interesting. So we'll continue on here. This oddly puts the ball firmly in the court of the superheroes. I think he means kid-friendly, not kind-friendly content is driving the industry, with more than 20% of content sold in comic book stores and 39% in bookstores. The fact that there's so many spelling errors in here, I'm like, I get some of the points here, but I'm still like hesitant to agree wholeheartedly. 41% of the overall sales in the printed book industry. The capes and cows merely constitute 10%. He did again, percent, and 15% in the comic book and general bookstores. My goodness, percent. What is happening here? Now you must be thinking, how does it matter when the superhero genre is absolutely conquering the motion picture domain? Marvel and DC characters are all the rage in the theaters. Not only that, I'm going to pause here. I still see people randomly will have. I was looking at guitar videos the other day, and people have Wonder Woman stickers on the guitars. People have Superman stickers on things, wearing Superman t-shirts. Comic book characters have penetrated the culture like nothing else, but they don't read them. It's wild. Granted, there is media dominance, the very source of the superhero movie industry. The comic books seeing a sharp decline in sales and quality has to be treated as a massive red flag. The reason many of the superhero movies conquered the box office were because of successful story arcs that were published by Marvel and DC years ago. The superhero movies tend to always rely on successful story arcs. That's true. They are cherry picking great story arcs that they're sort of basing these movies off of. So the question is, why would you make bland comic books that you're hoping for films to be made off of? Again, that's because it's a new comic book, so they can't take a big risk on it. These older books, these older story arcs have had proven success over time, over years. So it only makes sense that they're so successful. Anyway, this was an interesting take. It was slightly different. I didn't see anything about enjoy it while it lasts, folks. He says, "Oh boy, that's sad." Yeah, so this was an interesting take. It had more to do with film essentially ruining the comic book industry, and kids content eating the lunch of superhero movies, or superhero comics rather. So interesting take. I'd like to know what you think in the comments below. Let me know. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I still have books on Indiegogo, Downcast 3 and Fatal, and I'm working really hard to get those books out to you. Downcast 3 definitely is going to be the first one to get out to you. So looking forward to that. Oh, and I'm also looking at doing a convention in the fall. That's right. So more to come on that. I will talk to you later.